Hey everyone. There's been a lot of attention everywhere about possible foreign interference in our election systems. The leftist mainstream media blames the Russians, but if you've watched my Roy Moore video, the credibility of leftists accusing Russia is now completely gone, because we now have a confirmed case of leftists interfering with our elections while trying to blame Russia for it. Which brings us to Google. If you read the mainstream media, you would probably think that Google hasn't operated in China for years. And you'd be wrong, because this is demonstratively fake news. This brings us to Alltech Asia. You see, Google China becomes Google Beijing as it shifts office. Google China moved into its new headquarters in Beijing on August 1st, 2016. The company wanted to put a new face and say farewell to the past. So really, Google never left China. It merely virtue signaled that it did, and it changed its name from Google China to Google Beijing. Then, in December 2017, the New York Times reports, on Wednesday, Google unveiled a small but symbolically significant move toward that end, a China-based center devoted to artificial intelligence. Google said the center would have a team of experts in Beijing, where the company has hundreds of employees in research and development, as well as other roles. So not only has Google maintained a presence in China, but they actually have hundreds of employees stationed there. In addition to that, CNN states, Google now has 2 apps in China, but search remains off limits. The company said in a blog post Thursday that it has launched its file management tool, Files Go, in 4 Chinese app stores. Google effectively left China. And again, this is CNN, this is that fake news. They effectively left. No, they didn't effectively leave. They have an office of a couple hundred people. That's not effectively leaving anywhere. This is why nobody trusts CNN as a news source, because they lie. Okay, let's move on. Now, not only did Google remain in China, but during its reporting on Google's Dragonfly project for the Chinese government, The Intercept reports, as recently as last month, Google's search engine chief, Ben Gomes, told Google staff who were working on Dragonfly that they should have it ready to be quote-unquote brought off the shelf and quickly deployed. The employees were told that the main barrier to launching Dragonfly was the ongoing trade war between the United States and China. And then this report goes on to state that Pichai repeatedly traveled to China to meet with top Communist Party officials, and they make it very clear that Dragonfly was well beyond the exploratory stage. So really, the takeaways here are that the Dragonfly team should be ready for quick deployment, and that the trade war between the United States and China was the only thing slowing down the release. And most importantly, Sundar Pichai, Google's CEO, repeatedly traveled to China to meet with top Communist Party officials. Now, while all this information was publicly known and widely reported on, what is lesser known is a law passed by the Chinese government in mid-2017. It's called the National Intelligence Law of the People's Republic of China. And the New York Post had some very shocking things to say about it when covering the arrest of a top Chinese smartphone exec in Canada. They state, Huawei is much more than an innocent manufacturer of smartphones. It is a spy agency of the Chinese Communist Party. How do we know? Because the party has repeatedly said so. First, in 2015, and then again in June 2017, the party declared that all Chinese companies must collaborate in intelligence gathering. Quote, all organizations and citizens, reads Article 7 of China's National Intelligence Law, quote, must support, assist with, and collaborate in national intelligence work and guard the national intelligence work secrets they are privy to, unquote. All Chinese companies, whether they are private or owned by the state, are now part and parcel of the party's massive overseas espionage campaign. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. And remember this. Google Beijing is technically a Chinese company. Now, when Lawfare talked about this, they state, the intelligence law, by contrast, repeatedly obliges individuals, organizations, and institutions to assist public security and state security officials in carrying out a wide array of intelligence work. Article 7, the one they just talked about in the New York Post, stipulates that any organization or citizen shall support, assist, and cooperate with state intelligence work according to law. Article 14, in turn, grants intelligence agencies authority to insist on this support. State intelligence work organs, while legally carrying forth intelligence work, may demand that concerned organs, organizations, or citizens provide needed support, assistance, and cooperation. Organizations and citizens must also protect the secrecy of any state intelligence work secrets of which they are aware. These clauses appear to limit the obligations on individuals to Chinese citizens, but they do not stipulate that only Chinese organizations are subject to these requirements. The law's drafters chose language that does not limit these demands on individuals to Chinese citizens. Article 16 authorizes security officials to make inquiries of any individuals as part of their intelligence gathering and to examine their reference materials and files. These officials can also commandeer the communications equipment, transportation, buildings, and other facilities of individuals, as well as organizations and government organs. So the takeaways here are pretty clear. The intelligence law requires that individuals, organizations, and institutions actively help the Chinese government conduct espionage. Now, this law also allows the Chinese government to demand companies, including Google Beijing, to provide support, cooperation, and assistance in espionage. It also requires them, including Google, to protect any secrets that they are aware of. The Chinese government can also commandeer Google's communications equipment, buildings, and transportation. Now, in addition to that, I'm also going to provide you a link with a translation of the exact law itself. Now, this is an unofficial translation site. It's called ChinaLawTranslate.com. It's an unofficial translation that's constantly updated, but it's the closest thing that I could find to the actual law itself. And what's interesting is when I cross-referenced it from the Lawfare blog as well as the New York Post, the language of the statutes and the sections like Article 7, for example, were very similar to what both Lawfare and what the New York Post reported on. So I'm prone to trust this, but I just want to let everybody know this is not an official source. So take that for what you will. Because Google operates in China, they're required to be active participants in any Chinese espionage or propaganda campaign the government directs them to. Knowing this, is it any wonder why Google CEO Sundar Pichai keeps meeting with top Chinese Communist Party officials? More importantly, knowing that Google Beijing is required to work under the supervision of the Chinese government and are coordinating their Dragonfly project with top Chinese Communist officials, why hasn't Google registered as a foreign agent under FARA? Now, what's FARA, you may ask? It's the Foreign Agent Registration Act. It is a United States law that was passed originally in 1938, requiring that agents representing interests of foreign powers in any political or quasi-political capacity disclose their relationship with the foreign government and information about related activities and finances. And the laws in question are USC 22 subsection 612 and USC 22 subsection 611 under the definitions, which very clearly states an agent of a foreign principal means any person who acts as an agent or any person who acts in any other capacity at the order, request, or under the direction or control of a foreign principal or of a person any of whose activities are directly or indirectly supervised, directed, controlled, financed, or subsidized in whole or in major part by a foreign principal, and who directly or through any other person engages within the United States in political activities for or in the interests of such foreign principal is considered an agent. So I want you guys to be aware of that, because technically, by Google operating with the communist Chinese government, they are technically acting as an agent. Now, normally they would be exempt because they're a private company, but this foreign intelligence law passed in 2017, it actually overrides that. Now, what's interesting about this law is that under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, Google would be required to register within 10 days of beginning work for a foreign government. Yet, Google has been working with the Chinese government, by its own admission, since at least 2017 and never registered. Even worse is that Dragonfly was never shut down. According to The Intercept, the Beijing-based website 265.com is a Chinese-language web directory service that claims to be China's most used homepage. Google purchased the site in 2008. In recent weeks, teams working on Dragonfly have been told to use different data sets for their work. They are no longer gathering search queries from mainland China and are instead studying global Chinese queries that are entered into Google from people living in countries such as the United States and Malaysia. Those queries are qualitatively different from searches originating from within China itself. Records show that 265.com is still hosted on Google servers, but its physical address is listed under the name of Beijing Beijing Information and Technology Co., which has an office space on the third floor of a tower building in northwest Beijing's Heidan district. 265.com is operated as a Google subsidiary. So the takeaways are clear. 265.com is a Chinese subsidiary of Google and has been owned by Google since 2008. Dragonfly team members were told to gather global information on Chinese-related searches rather than just searches from mainland China alone. Google is still running in China under 265.com, and clearly, Dragonfly has not ended. To me, this is a concern because Google, by virtue of operating a Chinese company, could be forced by the Chinese government to use the global Chinese-related search studies for Chinese espionage. Chinese law also requires them to keep this fact a secret if they're involved, which directly conflicts with the United States foreign agent registration laws. Now, assuming Google has to register as a Chinese foreign agent, why is it still being allowed to meet with U.S. military leaders or even being allowed access to the Pentagon? You see, a couple months ago, Google CEO met with military leaders at the Pentagon seeking to smooth tensions over drone AI. Now, as an interesting side note, Sundar Pichai testified before Congress on December 11, 2018. Yet, less than 10 hours after his testimony ended, Google Beijing suffered a fire. According to Russia Today, a roaring fire burst through the roof that caused mass evacuations at Google's office in Beijing's tech district known as China's Silicon Valley. The fire, which broke out at 11 a.m. local time, burned through the roof of Google's glass-fronted office building, sending a plume of thick black smoke into the air. Huge fire this morning on top of the building of Beijing's tech district that houses Google's office. Employees tell me that everyone was evacuated for 20 minutes, but are now being let back in. Cause still not known. That's pretty impressive, because I'll tell you what, when you look at this image, that's a lot of smoke for such a small fire, especially a fire in which employees were only evacuated for 20 minutes. Of course, nobody knows what caused the fire. It just, it happened as though meme magic stepped in and caused it. Now, I'm sure that the fire at the Google Beijing building that sent plumes of smoke over 5 stories high, but yet was under control and put out in under 20 minutes, had nothing to do with Sundar Pichai's congressional testimony and was merely coincidental. Now, the facts revealed in this video raise some important concerns. While everyone is blaming Russia for election interference, why is no one questioning China? Especially since their 2017 national intelligence law requires all companies operating in China to participate, part and parcel, in communist Chinese intelligence and espionage activities. With that said, why isn't Google being required to register as a foreign agent of the Chinese government? Now, because Chinese law requires Google to act as a foreign agent of the Chinese government, why is Google still allowed access to our military and government infrastructure? These questions become especially important because of what led to Alex Jones and InfoWars being deplatformed across the internet. You see, Alex Jones accused Google of working with the Chinese government and was deplatformed immediately afterward. Now, I always thought that the coordinated deplatforming of Alex Jones was overkill, unless he was right and the Chinese government needed to silence him. From the publicly available evidence presented in this video, it appears that Alex Jones may have been right all along. This leads to another equally disturbing question. Why are agents of the Chinese government being allowed to silence American news outlets? Put another way, why are Chinese agents being allowed to silence Americans' constitutional right to freedom of speech and freedom of press? And why is the United States government remaining silent on this? Knowing that under Chinese law, Google operates as an espionage partner of the Chinese Communist government, why are they being allowed to contribute to election campaigns of U.S. officials? Doesn't this violate U.S. law? These are very important questions and concerns. Not only does there need to be open congressional hearings on Google's work with the Communist Chinese government, but until the American people can get some clear and verifiable answers about Google's ongoing partnership in China's communist intelligence gathering regime and what threats the Chinese communist partnership might pose to our government, they shouldn't be allowed anywhere near our government infrastructure, whether as lobbyists or as contractors or anything else. I'm DDJ, and this has been your dose of misandry today.